Hey, good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. Hope you survived Mother's Day. Hope your moms were spoiled and hope they had a great Sunday yesterday. This morning, I have a mug that was personally made just for me. That's my niece from quite a number of years ago now. That was her when she was a baby. And this year, she graduates high school. And so I just wanted to use kind of a little way to honor her and hopefully embarrass her as well. And just we're so proud of our family. Can't wait to see her graduate. I know my brother and sister-in-law are very proud of her, and so that's my mug today. So I did remember my mug. Um, I was thinking about this idea of waiting, and waiting's tough, especially in our culture. We're not really taught to wait well. I get frustrated that I have to take 30 seconds to reheat my food sometimes, or a minute or two, and uh, I'll put something in and I'm like, 2 minutes. This is gonna take forever. And and it's only 2 minutes. But the reality is, waiting is not a favorite word in our culture. We have waiting rooms in hospitals. Our parents make us wait to open our presents on Christmas Day. I know my parents did. Maybe your parents were a little more gracious to let you run down and rip them open. But there's just waiting, and some of us, there are things that we desire in life. I remember I talked before about how I waited a long time to find a wife, and but the Lord at the right time brought the best person for me. And so, waiting isn't always easy, and oftentimes it's very difficult. And of course, we're in this season of waiting, and it's not an easy season. And now I think what we're running into is just kind of this: we're waiting with an understanding that there's an end to some of this, and it almost makes it that much more difficult. And so, um, what can we do? What does it require of us? Waiting isn't easy, especially when we feel like it's time to move, it's time to get going. But I was reading this verse on waiting before the Lord, and it says in Psalms 135 and 6, "Wait for the Lord. My soul waits, and in His word I hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than watchmen for the morning, more than watchmen for the morning." And he just puts this emphasis of like we're in the season of waiting. Where do we continue to remain in waiting on the Lord? Where do we continue to remain in waiting on allowing the Holy Spirit to lead us? Where do we continue to trust that God is going to lead us? And so even when somebody else, it says here, even before the watchman in the morning, and maybe in our context, it's like even when somebody else is trying to get us to hurry over here, we know that we need to wait on God's timing. And so one of the things I appreciate is as a group of churches in Vacaville, we're wanting to open together to show a sign of unity, but also in respect to the leadership of our county. And so we've been talking about that. We've been like, what does that look like? And in the midst of that, there's just still this waiting, and we wanted to wait on God's timing, on God's wisdom, in respect to our leadership. And so we kind of have that place. And I like what he said. That I wait on the Lord, and my soul waits, and in His word I hope. And so in waiting I hope. And I think that's a very important thing, is that in waiting I hope on Christ and His reality for my life. I wait on God for where He's leading. And waiting can do some good things. Waiting can build anticipation. Again, many of us the night before Christmas, right? There's so much we're waiting, and we're like we want to get open those presents, but there's great anticipation and great hope. One of my favorite movies is A Christmas Story, and the anticipation that Ralphie had to get that BB gun was just felt throughout the whole movie. And when it finally came to pass, it was just like this epic moment where he got his BB gun, and then if you've seen the movie, he also ended up shooting his eye out. So you have to watch the movie. But, it requires the fruit of patience, especially as we grow restless, and we see this right now. Where in waiting am I allowing the Holy Spirit? If I'm waiting on the Lord, where am I also letting Him build not only hope but patience as a fruit of the Spirit? Waiting, it gives us a season of allowing God to work in our lives. And this verse reminds us of that. I wait on the Lord. I wait for the Lord. My soul waits in His word, I hope. So there is a, sorry about that. There's a waiting that allows God to continue to be at work in our lives. And it requires intentionality. I need to be ready for when I no longer have to wait. And so at some point, the waiting will end. At some point, we'll be able to move on. And I remember, it'll be almost 20 years ago. I had worked with an evangelist. We were in school assemblies, and we do night rallies and we do different things like that, and they were a lot of fun. I mean, it was impacting. I mean, we'd see hundreds of kids come to Christ, and be able to help and speak at public schools where you'd have thousands of kids at times, and it was challenging, but it was exciting. And then after that, I moved home. Now, for me, you might think, oh, that's great, you move home, but I didn't think that was going to be my next step. So I go and I work with this evangelist for a couple years. I move home, and then the next thing I'm wondering is I'm working at a grocery store, attending the church I had interned at and grew up at, and I just felt in limbo. And I remember I was in this season of waiting, and I had others that even tried to tell me like, no, you need to do this and you need to do that, and all I could tell people was like, listen, I just clearly feel like God is telling me to wait. And to be honest, it was frustrating because I didn't want to be waiting, but it's where I knew God had me in that season. As I look back, it was exactly what God needed to do. I needed to be waiting because in that time, there was to be some things with my grandmother that would come up that we'd have to attend to. There would be things at my church that would happen that I would begin to be involved in and help with some transition in our youth ministry. And then, literally, almost to achieve, my grandmother would go to move to live with my aunt, and so that situation resolved. The church had hired a new youth pastor, so that situation resolved, and for everything I needed to be there for that I didn't understand in the moment resolved. And plus, I was able to be there to help my family through all this, and I was needing to do that in the midst of even what my mom would begin to go through with her muscular dystrophy. So I look back, I realized God knew exactly what He was doing in the waiting. Even when I didn't fully understand, He was faithful and He was true. So I encourage you, wait for the Lord. Let your soul wait upon Him and hope, and let His word be your hope. And trust in that this morning, guys. And so waiting isn't easy, but God's probably doing something in your life this morning. Have a good day. Bye. Happy Monday.